My name is Amanda Hayes, and I was born in the suburbs of Seattle. When I close my eyes and go back to those very first memories, I can still see the living room where my little brother and I played, while my mother sang in the church choir, and my father carried his Bible under his arm. To anyone looking in from the outside, our family might have looked almost perfect, a house filled with prayer, music, and a sense of belonging. But behind the doors, there was another reality. My father lived in two worlds. On Sundays, he preached about love and righteousness, even when he didn't have a church to speak in. He told me, even as a little girl, that I was precious and no one should ever harm me. Yet the same man who could quote scripture with tears in his eyes could also raise his voice in rage, sometimes turning his anger toward my mother, sometimes toward my brother. I never knew which version of him would walk through the door. That uncertainty became the foundation of my childhood. When I was only 4, something happened that would mark me for years to come. A neighbor crossed boundaries that should never be crossed with a child. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? My father had already warned me, if anyone touches you, I'll kill them. To a child, that was not protection, it was terror. I imagined my father going to prison, our family destroyed, blood on his hands because of me. So I carried the secret alone, and with it, a heavy stone of shame in my tiny chest. By the time I was 11, our lives had shifted again. My father began drinking, or maybe I just noticed it for the first time. I remember coming home one day and seeing a beer can in his hand, and the sight chilled me to the bone. I didn't fully understand why, but I knew something was wrong. His temper grew sharper, his arguments with my mother louder. Our home was no longer a sanctuary. It became a battlefield. Those years were also filled with men friends of my father, neighbors, strangers who gathered around bonfires. Many of them looked at me in ways a young girl should never experience. Compliments that felt too heavy, glances that lasted too long. I began to understand, long before I was ready, that my body could draw attention I didn't want. I froze in those moments, unable to speak, unable to move, carrying the weight of confusion and disgust. It wasn't only adults. Even children at school seemed to act out what they must have seen in their own homes. In first grade, a boy forced me to the ground and tried to imitate things no child should know. I learned to fight back, to kick, to claw my way free. But the damage was already done. I felt unclean, ashamed, as if I were the one at fault. That shame wrapped itself around me like a second skin, one I couldn't shed. My parents' marriage finally collapsed when I was in my early teens. What should have been a moment for healing only became another wound. My father, in a fit of rage, took my brother and me away from our mother. He packed our belongings into trash bags and drove us to another city. We couldn't call her for days. He told us he was protecting us, but it felt like kidnapping. My mother, who had always been my shelter, was suddenly gone, and I was left to navigate a world of chaos without her steady hand. By 17, I thought I had found my escape. I met a boy, convinced myself he was the one, and clung to him like a lifeline. When I became pregnant, I imagined marriage, family, the stability I had craved my whole life. But he didn't want that life. He walked away, and I was left to face an impossible decision alone. The termination of that pregnancy broke something inside me. It felt like all the trauma of my childhood had been poured into that single moment, and the grief was unbearable. After that, I slipped into rebellion. School no longer mattered. My senior year was a haze of depression and defiance. I barely graduated. I moved from place to place, sometimes with boyfriends, sometimes with roommates, always searching for something that felt like home. But no matter where I landed, the emptiness followed me. At night, I would lie awake and imagine the life I thought I was destined for: a wedding dress, a family, a safe home where my children would never have to fear the things I feared. That dream was like a mirage, shimmering in the distance, always out of reach. Instead, I stumbled through one unhealthy relationship after another, collecting more scars along the way. The truth is, by the time I turned 18, I was already exhausted. I had carried secrets no child should bear, lost a mother's daily presence, endured a father's unpredictable storms, and faced heartbreak before I even became a woman. And yet, somewhere deep inside me, a small flame still flickered, the hope that love might one day save me. I didn't know then that my search for love and acceptance would soon lead me into a world I could never have imagined for myself. When I turned 18, I believed freedom was finally mine. I thought adulthood meant leaving behind the chaos of my childhood. What I didn't know was that adulthood would bring new chains, not freedom. Back then, my only dream was simple. I wanted to be a wife and a mother. I thought if I could just find the right man, someone who would truly love me, all the pain of my childhood would fade. While my friends dreamed of careers, I spent hours on dating sites, convinced my future husband was out there. That search quickly turned dark. I traveled to meet strangers in other states, trusting too easily, desperate to be chosen. More than once I was harmed or deceived. Each time I returned home smaller, more ashamed. My mother tried to warn me, but what I longed to hear was different. I love you. I want you safe. Without those words, I told myself no one cared. And so I kept searching. There were boyfriends, engagements, and painful breakups. I would move in, imagine wedding rings and children, then watch it all collapse. Each heartbreak convinced me I had to give more, change more, sacrifice everything to be loved. Still, I worked. I even earned respect at an office job and was considered for a promotion. But depression pulled me under. Nights spent online made mornings unbearable. My ambition faded, replaced by exhaustion and loneliness. One night, drifting online, I discovered a modeling site. At first, it seemed harmless. Ordinary people posting photos, sometimes in swimsuits. They weren't glamorous, yet they were getting paid. I thought, if they can, maybe I can too. I told myself there would be boundaries. A bathing suit. Some post photos, that was it. But within days, emails arrived. Not for fashion, but for explicit work. At first, I refused. I remembered how much I had hated the way boyfriends watched adult films, how I felt I could never compete. Why would I step into a world that had already made me feel so small? But then another heartbreak left me in bed for days. I felt like I had nothing left to lose. Those offers, once unthinkable, now felt like a way to matter. The first photographer who reached out called himself a professional. He told me I had the look, that I could be in magazines. For a girl who had felt invisible most of her life, those words felt like oxygen. The first shoot was in a hotel. I brought lingerie as asked. At first it was stiff, awkward. Then he told me to remove my top. My gut screamed no. I wanted to leave, but guilt whispered, he invested in me, I owe him. So I stayed. When I saw the photos later, it was like looking at a stranger. That girl wasn't me, she was someone I invented to survive. I promised myself I wouldn't do it again. But I did. The money came. The compliments came. And each time I slid further away from who I once was. Soon I was flown to Los Angeles, shooting in mansions with marble floors. Makeup artists painted my face, photographers directed me like I was clay. I told myself it was glamorous. But each time I crossed another line, I felt emptier. To cope, I learned to disconnect, to imagine I was only an image, not a person. I told myself I was in control. But the truth was, I wasn't chasing fame or fortune. I was chasing love, acceptance, proof that I mattered. For a moment, in the flashing lights and hollow praise, I thought I had found it. What I couldn't see was how close I was to falling into years of exploitation and despair. The deeper I went into the adult industry, the more I convinced myself I was in control. I told myself I was making choices, setting boundaries, earning money on my own terms. But underneath, I was still that little girl, desperate to be loved, willing to give away pieces of myself to keep someone near. That need pulled me into the most destructive relationship of my life. He was older, charismatic, and seemed to understand the business better than anyone I had met. At first, he treated me like I was valuable. He promised to help me succeed, to protect me, to guide me. What I didn't realize was that he was slowly tightening a cage around me. We moved in together quickly. It felt safer not to be alone. But safety was an illusion. The man who claimed to love me soon showed another face. He controlled my shoots, decided what work I would take, and pushed me to cross lines. I swore I never would. When I resisted, he reminded me that without him I was nothing. When I obeyed, he reminded me that I owed him everything. His control wasn't just about the work. He isolated me from friends and family. He monitored my calls, my messages, my movements. I lived in constant fear of his moods. Some nights he was charming, almost gentle. Other nights he was terrifying. His anger was like a storm, loud, violent, unpredictable. He would slam doors, break objects, shout threats that still echo in my head. I'll put you 6 feet under. Drugs became part of the picture too. I never wanted them, never planned to use them. But when life is unbearable, numbness can feel like relief. I tried things I never imagined, sometimes to escape, sometimes just to keep him calm. Strangely, I never became addicted, but he did. His highs made him reckless, his lows made him cruel. I walked on eggshells, never knowing what version of him would appear. We moved from Florida to California together, chasing bigger opportunities. To the outside world, it might have looked like progress, new contracts, new connections, a career rising. But behind closed doors, I was trapped. He cheated, lied, and lived a secret life I only discovered later. I was alone in a strange city, tied to a man who frightened me, dependent on him for my work and my rent. During those years, I lost myself completely. I stopped recognizing the girl in the mirror. My hair, my nails, my tan, everything was manufactured. My smile was painted on. Inside, I felt hollow. I told myself being abused was still better than being abandoned. At least with him I wasn't alone. That twisted logic kept me there, day after day, year after year. The cycle repeated endlessly. Violence, apologies, promises, and more violence. I wanted to leave, but I was terrified. He convinced me no one else would want me, that without him I was worthless. Deep down, a part of me even believed death might be easier than escape. Looking back now, I can see how broken I was. I had no sense of self-worth, no belief that I deserved better. I had become a prisoner in my own life, and the bars weren't just his fists or his words, they were my own fear and shame. For 3.5 years I lived like this. 3.5 years of hiding bruises, of pretending to the world that everything was fine while I was falling apart inside. I thought love meant survival at any cost. I thought pain was the price of belonging. I didn't know it then, but I was nearing the breaking point. Something had to change. And when it finally did, it wasn't because of him, it was because, for the first time in a long time, someone reminded me that hope still existed. By the time I reached my late 20s, people said I was at the top of my career. The shoots were bigger, the money was higher, the attention was constant. To the outside world, it might have looked glamorous, Amanda Hayes, traveling, earning, being seen. But inside, I felt emptier than ever. I was living with a new boyfriend, a mainstream actor who seemed like the opposite of every toxic man I had known. He wasn't part of the industry, he had a son, and for a while I thought he was the answer to all my prayers. We hiked together, ate breakfast together, spent nearly every hour of the day together. I convinced myself he was the good guy I had been waiting for, but even good guys have secrets. One night, while he was away filming, I begged him not to go to strip clubs. He laughed, told me I had nothing to worry about. Hours later he called, drunk, claiming to be at a restaurant. But I could hear the music in the background. I knew. The truth came out. He had gone exactly where I asked him not to. To most people, it might sound small, but to me, it was everything. Here I was, at the peak of my career, with money and recognition, yet still not enough for the man I loved. I collapsed on the kitchen floor and cried out, God, if you are real, give me a sign. I didn't know if I even believed anymore, but I had nothing left to hold on to. The very next day on set, someone approached me. He asked about my life, my work. Then he looked me in the eye and asked, do you believe in God? No one had asked me that in years. My heart pounded. This was the sign I had begged for. He told me I didn't have to keep living this way, that freedom was possible, that I could start over. We stepped outside and prayed together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something break open inside me. Hope. That night I made my decision. When my boyfriend came home, I told him I couldn't sleep beside him. I told him I was done. He laughed, asked how I would pay rent, how I would survive. I didn't have an answer, but I knew that if God had given me this sign, then somehow I would be cared for. I moved out before my boyfriend returned from his trip. With the help of strangers who became friends, I packed my things and left the apartment for good. I didn't look back. Then came the hard part. Overnight, I went from earning more than $15,000 a month to making nothing. My contracts tied up my name and image, and even though I had walked away, others continued to profit from my past. My fans were told lies. My website was taken over. Everything I had built financially vanished, and yet, strangely, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending. My hair extensions came out, my nails broke off, my tan faded. I wasn't the polished fantasy anymore, I was just Amanda. It was terrifying, but it was also real. The months that followed were brutal. There were days I couldn't afford food, nights I wondered how I would pay rent. But then small miracles would happen. Someone would step in with groceries. A check would arrive unexpectedly. Each time I felt like God was whispering, "I've got you." My identity had been stripped down to nothing. No fans, no cameras, no false glamour. Just me, raw and broken. But in that breaking, I began to discover who I really was. Walking away from the industry was the hardest decision I ever made. But it was also the first truly free choice of my life. Leaving the industry was only the beginning. Walking away from the cameras did not erase the trauma. In many ways, it made the battle harder. Suddenly I was alone with myself, stripped of the masks I had worn for so long. The silence was deafening. I had no steady income. Overnight I had gone from living comfortably to barely surviving. My old website still existed, run by others who profited from my past, but I received nothing. I had to learn to live without the false security of a paycheck tied to exploitation. Rent went unpaid, cupboards were bare, and yet, time and again, help appeared at the last moment. A stranger brought groceries. A friend slipped me money for bills. I began to believe these weren't coincidences, they were reminders that I was being carried. Losing the outward identity was brutal. My hair extensions came out, my nails were undone, my tan faded. For years, those details had been my armor. Without them, I felt exposed. I no longer knew who I was when I looked in the mirror. Anxiety pressed on me daily. PTSD haunted me at night. But even in the darkness, I clung to hope. I threw myself into faith and healing. I attended church groups, learned about healthy relationships, and slowly began to unlearn everything my past had taught me about love. I had always believed pain was the price of belonging. Now I was told love could be different, that respect, trust, and patience were possible. It was hard to believe, but I wanted to try. For a long time, I stayed single. I called it my fast. No men, no dating sites, no desperate searching. Just me and God. I had to face the wounds I had buried for decades, to accept that I was worthy of love, even if no man ever chose me. Those months were some of the loneliest of my life, but they were also the foundation of my healing. And then, when I least expected it, someone came into my life. He wasn't part of the industry. He wasn't impressed by fame or appearances. In fact, he kept his distance at first, setting boundaries. I didn't understand. When I tried to hold his arm, he pulled away. At first, it hurt. Later, I realized it was respect. He wanted to know me, not consume me. Over time, we built a friendship. We studied together, talked about faith, and shared our struggles honestly. A year later, that friendship blossomed into something more. When he finally asked me to be his Valentine, it felt like the most genuine invitation I had ever received. Today, that man is my husband. We have been married for years now, and the life we share is nothing like my past. He has never looked at my old work. He isn't interested. What mattered to him was who I had become, not who I used to be. For the first time, I learned what it felt like to be safe in someone's arms. Marriage didn't erase my scars, but it gave me a place to heal. The jealousy, insecurity, and panic that once ruled my relationships slowly faded. The nightmares grew less frequent. One day I realized I no longer lived with the constant weight of PTSD. Somewhere along the way, without me noticing, it had lifted. Looking back now, I can hardly recognize the girl I used to be, the frightened child, the desperate teenager, the broken young woman hiding behind makeup and false smiles. I am not her anymore. I am a wife, a friend, a believer, a survivor. My story isn't just about what I endured. It's about what I found on the other side. I learned that worth doesn't come from attention, from money, or from being desired. Worth comes from within, from knowing you are loved simply for existing. If there is one thing I would tell the girl I used to be, or any girl chasing love in all the wrong places, it is this: you are already enough. Don't trade pieces of yourself just to feel wanted. The right love will see you, value you, and protect you. And until that love arrives, hold on to hope, because hope is what carried me from the shadows into the light.